Well, welcome everybody to another segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. And of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future. And going to have fun this segment. We're going to be talking to Brian David Bruns. Who is Brian David Bruns? Well, he's the author of Cruise Confidential. He's also an author of numerous nonfiction travel adventure books. He has appeared on ABC's 2020, featuring his Cruise Confidential series. He also has some other books, been lauded by USA Today and the Today Show, dozens of awards, including 2 National Humor Books of the Year. Chased his girlfriend here and there. We'll talk about that. And now finds himself in the friendly confines of Las Vegas, Nevada, with a brand new work again called Rumble Yell, Discovering America's Biggest Bike Ride. True adventurer indeed. Brian, how are you, my friend?
I am fabulous beyond belief. Thank you.
Well, you do seem rested and ready. Let's do this. Let's give our Lewis at Large listeners a little bit more about your background. You are a travel author. That always begs the question, how did you get into that? What happened? Do you just declare yourself a travel author, or tell us about that? I know you also worked for on a cruise line for a while, so tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you today to being who you are.
Sure. You're right. There is a little bit of I am now declaring myself a travel writer involved, but I had not traveled anywhere until I was about 30, and then I met this woman who was from Romania who worked at sea, and I dropped everything and chased her for a couple of years. So that's why I was working on cruise lines, and I got in the habit of the travel bug bit me while I was doing that. And I lived in Romania with her for a while and started keeping notes and started traveling more and more. And when I came back to the States, because I finally caught her, but it was kind of a catch and release program, if you will. And when I came back to the States, I said, I'm going to keep traveling, and I got a publisher, and the rest is history, as they say.
When you were working on the cruise line, I'm curious, what were some of your duties? And again, you said you were chasing a female. I assume this female also worked on the same ship. Those cruise ships do not travel terribly fast.
No, they do not. Actually, only half of the time were we on the same ships. The environment there is pretty tough on the crew. I was a waiter for the first year, which I had the distinction, the dubious distinction, of being the only American in Carnival's history to survive a contract without quitting, which was 1 year. And I would have quit, too. It's just that this was the only way I could be with my girlfriend, or my would-be girlfriend, because we weren't even on the same ship for half of that year.
So what part of this great planet were you cruising? All over?
At that time we were in the Caribbean. So that was my first year at sea, and then after that, I did end up switching jobs to become an art auctioneer, and I hopped on a bunch of different cruise lines for that. I did 3 years in that gig, and that one I was all over the planet.
Well, I understand that is that's another big business. I've got a personal friend as an aside that does that as well. They organize cruise art auctions. So maybe somewhere along that line you guys have run into one another. But anyway, all right. Well, let's talk about Rumble Yell, Discovering America's Biggest Bike Ride. That is something that, okay, so we've chased the girlfriend on the cruise ship. We honored our contract with the cruise ship, so we've led an honorable life up to this point. Take us as Brian moves from the cruise ship to riding his bike a long, long way.
Yeah, well, when I moved back to the States and I became a travel writer at that point, so I would go get into kind of misadventures and many different other countries, but I never really did anything too stupid in America. I mean, nothing that I can say on air, and, you know, I was a teenager, so there was lots of stupid things, but that's not the point. And a friend of mine said, hey, let's do RAGBRAI, which is the Register's annual great bike ride across Iowa. It's been going 40 years. It's actually the biggest bike ride in the world. They cap it at 10,000 riders. It's a ride. It's not a race. So I figured I could do this thing because I'm not a biker. And if I have to go slow, I'll go slow. And that's what prompted the whole thing. I had heard about RAGBRAI, but I'd never done it. And when I did end up doing it, the experience was so amazing that that's why I wrote the book, because I figured Mom's not going to ride this thing, and I want her to know what this experience is really like.
Right.
So armchair adventurers, if you want to know what it's like and you don't want to deal with the sweat and the hills and the crotch lube, just read the book instead. It's much easier.
Right. Well, describe this again. I think this began, back in like the early 70s, correct?
Yes, 1974 was the first year.
Okay. And again, it's a specific route across Iowa, and you do it at your own pace. Is that the idea?
That's right. It actually varies the route every year. Sometimes they do northern Iowa, sometimes central, sometimes southern. But it always starts on the Missouri River, where you dip your back tire in the Missouri, and it finishes on the Mississippi River, where you dip your front tire. So the ritual is actually very important. It gives you that sense of, I did this thing.
True accomplishment.
Rituals are important, yeah. And so that way they can pick different small towns every single year, and the towns lobby very hard to get the ride to come through, which I might add is kind of amusing, because some of these towns have population 105. And yet 15 to 20,000 people will come through in one day. So you can imagine the chaos. It's wonderful chaos.
Yep, good for tourism, too. Again, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck here of Lewis at Large Radio. This segment, we're talking to Brian David Bruns, best-selling travel and multinational award-winning author of nonfiction travel books. You've seen him on ABC's 2020 on the Cruise Confidential series, and prolific writer about travel indeed and his many adventures. We're talking specifically about Rumble Yell, a brand new work he's got out called Discovering America's Biggest Bike Ride. Did you train at all for this, or again, was this something you thought, you know what, if it takes me a year, it takes me a year?
Well, I did do a little bit of training. I had not ridden a bike in over 20 years. Whereas my friend who suggested it was a big biker. He lives in Portland, Oregon, which is a big biking community. So I wanted to make sure that I could keep up with him. But I live in Las Vegas now. So to train something like this, I have to get outside of the city and train out in the deserts where they're, setting off nuclear bombs a few years ago. So it's a very different environment and very extreme temperatures and dryness and all that. So it almost broke me just training for the thing. Before even the first day, I was almost a broken man. But I persevered and came to Iowa, and it all worked out. It was all worth it.
I've got a question for you, specifically about the ride. You say people go at their own pace. Are there people, staffers, so to speak, at the beginning and at the end? And if they're at the end, and the first rider comes through on day 3, let's say, for the heck of it, are someone still hanging around like day 4 and 5?
Well, each day is actually the short answer is no. You're on your own, really. It's very organized, and they don't really keep track of each individual rider, though. So they give you plenty of time. They close the streets. They do the best job they can to make it easy for everyone to reach the overnight town. But if you don't reach the overnight town, well, you're on your own, and you're going to be spending the night in the cornfields.
Okay. So you would. So is this when you go into town? That's where you just buy food, or you take a lot of stuff with you? I wouldn't imagine you'd want very much heavy in a backpack on your back.
Yeah, you're right about that. There's a lot of vendors along the route, and a lot of vendors that show up at the overnight town, and that's a huge part of the RAGBRAI ride. In fact, it's not about bikes; it's about people, and it's about food, and it's about partying, really. You can get these big Iowa chops along the way that are almost a pound, right? I mean, that'll keep you full for a day. But pancakes and pie and beer every other stop. Farmhouses, people will take the day off and just grill up brats and sell them to you along the roadside. I mean, it's amazing. So I actually gained 6 pounds at the end of a week in 500 miles. Biking, I gained 6 pounds. Couldn't believe it.
That you must have been, again, how many people rode in the thing? Roughly how many?
10,000 is the official limit, but we know that there's upwards of 15,000 on any given day.
Okay. And did they all have certain kinds of bikes, or could you find virtually every kind there?
Every kind of bike. That was actually a lot of fun to see how people would decorate their bikes. Some people would get a long tandem bike, and they would dress it up as a banana. In my case, I spray painted my bike Dayglow green. Bike, seat, handlebars, tires, all of it. And I actually did that in a moment of self-loathing, but everybody seemed to think it was a brilliant idea, and I got like 50 comments a day about Green Machine, Jolly Green Giant, John Deere, you name it, any green pun you could think of.
So
people were throwing at me.
So as 10,000 bikers would spread out across the state, did you guys ride as individuals, or did it kind of hang with 3 or 4 maybe bikers that kind of wanted to go at your speed? Is that how that worked out?
Yeah, it kind of did work out that way. I mean, one of the really great things about the experience is that it's like 10,000 members of an extended family. You know, the whole shared hardship brings people together vibe. Well, there was a lot of that. And so if you find somebody who is at about your pace that you don't know, you strike up conversations along the routes. Sometimes you start seeking them out the next days. It's really a great way to meet people and learn about the world. And there's people usually from all 50 states that show up and several other countries. So it's a great learning opportunity, assuming that you're not like a wallflower.
Right.
It's a bad place to be shy.
Right. Well, I know, again, we're talking to Brian Bruns. It's Bruns, right? That's Bruns, B-R-U-N-S.
Bruns, actually,
yeah,
thank
Brian
you,
Bruns.
yeah.
Good Lord.
Runs
My
with
God.
spoons. It was terrible in elementary school.
Yeah. No, well, I hear you. I was called Lewis Warner a bunch, too, so I'm with you. I sympathize. I know that this was more than just a bike ride for you. It was a sense of personal accomplishment, but you also reflect quite a bit in this work about some things that you learned about yourself and others. One of those was a big theme, I know, and you mentioned it earlier, was your understanding and appreciation for America's service people. Share, if you would, with our listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was one of those moments that I think, like everybody else, I take it for granted. You know, we all hear the cliches, you know, freedom isn't free and all of that. And just because you hear it all the time doesn't mean it really sinks in, right? And one of the guys that I rode with was in the Navy, and he was going to retire after 20 years. It was only 3 weeks shy. And he got me thinking a lot about just the military in general. And it occurred to me that every single person I met and talked to was either in the military or had a family member in the military. And then it got me thinking that even my own father was in the Navy for 4 years. And he grew up dirt poor, went to the Navy, did the GI Bill, became an engineer and raised a family, middle class, all that. I mean, total success, all thanks to the Navy. And, of course, anything that happens to mom and dad before you were born just doesn't count, right? Of course, I don't think about it. And so as I was riding, and by day 6 or 7 of cornfield, you start to you have the time for introspection, and I was starting to figure out, this is where I fit in Iowa, this is where I fit in the world, and a big part of that has directly impacted my life, and I didn't even acknowledge it, was all the servicemen and women. It was just kind of like the light bulb went off. So I dedicated the book to all the servicemen and women, past and present, because I'm a member of the Civil War Trust, which is preserving the battlegrounds of the Civil War. And I even donated 330 paperbacks a couple days ago to the Wounded Warrior Project.
Wow. Well, you know, I'm curious, Brian, with your sort of reflection on your experience here. If you're 21 years old and doing this ride, is it a different reflection or perspective than if you're 40 or if you're 65?
Yeah, I do think that's a major factor, age, because there's a lot of 21-year-olds who don't have any time for introspection at all because they're too busy finding the next beer tent. And Ragbri did for a long time have too much of a party reputation. I mean, they almost stopped the thing because people were getting rowdy and out of hand. Now they've curbed it and cut it down, and they have a lot of teams that have kind of a self-policing action going on, like, oh, Frank has had one too many, we'll take care of him, kind of a thing. So 40 years old is a great time to do a little bit of reflecting. Perhaps it's the first time for some of us. And believe me, there's a lot of people that are 60 or older that do the ride, and I can only imagine what's going on in their mind. I'll be finding out because I'm sure I'll be doing the ride again in another 20 years.
Yeah, well, that kind of that also kind of begs the question, I guess, is of the 10 to 15,000 people that do this, what percentage, as far as you know, ultimately drop out and say, you know what, to hell with this?
I would wager that almost everybody makes it all the way. Partly because if you get tired, you can just take a break as long as you want. And also, there's just such an overwhelming support network there. You know, if you have any problems, like with your bike, people are always pulling over as good Samaritans to help fix your bike for you and, you know, to just keep you going. It's just this huge outpouring of support and positivity. So I would imagine everybody makes it. And certainly by day 6 or 7, you're tired, you're grumpy, you're hot, you're tired of corn, you're going a little corn crazy and heat crazy. But once you dip that front tire in the Mississippi River, you're already planning for next year to do it all over again.
Yeah. What, again, you said that you mentioned that prior to this long, long ride across the state of Iowa, that you had not ridden a bike for a couple of decades. Have you ridden your bike since?
No, no, I haven't. But that's because I'm back in Vegas, and I do not find Las Vegas to be conducive to the type of riding I want to do.
Yeah.
I do still have the bike, and I will never give him up. Big Green is staying with me until such time that I dust it off. And my big thing is I like green, and I miss green. And if I'm surrounded by green, I want to be riding in it. And I'm in the middle of a lot of brown because it's Vegas.
Well, you have done, again, you've written works, you've been on television, travel's your gig. And it obviously is a labor of love for you. What now that you've ridden across the state of Iowa, what's the next thing? What's the next project for Brian Bruns?
Well, the next project is to write a book called Misadventures, probably, assuming my editors don't force the change. But I have lots of little stories of things going wrong on some of my adventures overseas, and things that are too short to make a book out of. Like the night that I was trapped by a rabid dog on a mountaintop in Transylvania when a storm came in. You know, that's a great story. It's a true story. Truth is stranger than fiction, but it's not enough for a book. So I can get all these little gems, you know, that are
right.
that I've been waiting to share. And you know, if I have a drink with somebody, that's usually the only time they come out. So this way, I can get a whole bunch of them out. I'm hoping anyway. Kind of the shotgun approach.
Well, the work, again, is called Rumble Yell, and it is a hilarious new work discovering America's biggest bike ride. The author, Brian David Bruns, national best-selling author. You've also seen him on the Today Show, and you've seen him on 2020 with his Cruise Confidential, and it is published by World Waters Publication. Hey, Brian, how can people find out more about your adventures and maybe pick up a copy of the work?
Sure. Well, all of my works are available anywhere books are sold. So if you go to your Barnes & Noble and it's no longer on the shelf, hopefully that means it's selling like hotcakes,
Yep.
But they can always order it for you. And, of course, there's Amazon.com. But if you want to find out more about what I'm doing and some of my adventures, and I have a lot of photos and videos, things like that, you can go to my website, which is bdbruns.com.
Which is bdbruns.com, correct?
Yes, thank you, yes.
All right. Hey, listen, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Rest those weary legs, take care of Big Green, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.